Chapter 16 Just Like a Book. John Pendleton greeted Pollyanna with a smile. "Well, Miss Pollyanna, you must be a very forgiving little person, else you wouldn't have come to see me again today." "Why, Mr. Pendleton, I was real glad to come, and I don't see why I shouldn't be either." "Oh, well, I was pretty cross with you, I'm afraid, both the other day when you were so kindly brought me the jelly, and that time when you found me with the broken leg. I don't think I've ever thanked you for that. Now, even you would admit that you were very forgiving to come and see me after such ungrateful treatment as that." Pollyanna stirred uneasily. "But I was glad to find you. I don't mean I was glad your leg was broken, of course," she corrected hurriedly. John Pendleton smiled. "I understand. Your tongue does get away with you once in a while, doesn't it? I do thank you, however. You are a very brave little girl to do what you did that day. I thank you for the jelly, too," he added. "Did you like it?" asked Pollyanna. "Very much. There isn't any more today that Aunt Polly didn't send, is there?" His visitor looked distressed. "No, sir." She hesitated and then went on. "Please, Mr. Pendleton, I didn't mean to be rude when I said Aunt Polly did not send the jelly." There was no answer. John Pendleton was not smiling now. He was looking straight ahead. After a time he sighed and turned to Pollyanna. "Well, well, this will never do. I didn't send for you to see me moping this time. Listen. Out in the library you will find a carved box on the lower shelf of the big case with glass doors. That is, it'll be there if that confounded woman hasn't moved it. You may bring it to me. It is heavy, but not too heavy for you to carry, I think." "Oh, I'm awfully strong," declared Pollyanna cheerfully, and in a minute she returned with the box. It was a wonderful half-hour that Pollyanna spent then. The box was full of treasures that John Pendleton had picked up in years of travel. There was an entertaining story about each one. The visit was delightful, but before it was over, Pollyanna realized that they were talking about something besides the wonderful things in the beautiful carved box. They were talking of herself, of Nancy, of Aunt Polly, and of her daily life. They were talking, too, even of the life and home long ago in the far western town. When it was nearly time for her to go, the man said, "Little girl, I want you to come see me often, will you? I'm lonesome, and I need you. I thought at first, after I found out who you were, that I didn't want you to come any more. You reminded me of something I have tried for long years to forget. But I've changed my mind, and now I want you to come. Will you?" "Why, yes, I'd love to come," said Pollyanna. "Thank you," said John Pendleton gently. After supper that evening, Pollyanna, sitting on the back porch, told Nancy all about Mr. John Pendleton's wonderful carved box and the still more wonderful things it contained. "And to think," sighed Nancy, "that he showed you all them things and told you about 'em, him that's so cross he never talks to no one." "Well, but he isn't cross, Nancy, only outside," objected Pollyanna. "I don't see why everybody thinks he's so bad either. They wouldn't if they knew him. But even Aunt Polly doesn't like him very well. She wouldn't send him the jelly to him, you know, and she was so afraid he'd think she'd send it. What beats me is how he happened to make it so, to take to you so, Miss Pollyanna. Meaning no offense to you, of course, but he ain't the sort of man who generally takes to kids," said Nancy. Pollyanna smiled. "But he did, Nancy," she nodded. "Only he didn't want to. Why, today he owned up that one time he just felt he never wanted to see me again because I reminded him of something he wanted to forget." "Well, what's that?" asked Nancy excitedly. "He said you reminded him of something he wanted to forget. Well, what is it?" "Well, he didn't tell me. He just said it was something." "The mystery!" breathed Nancy in an awestruck voice. That's why he took to you in the first place. Why, that's just like a book. I've read lots of 'em. Laud, Lady Maud's Secret and The Lost Heir and Hidden for Years. All of 'em had mysteries like hers, or like theirs. My stars! Now tell me everything he said. No wonder he took to you. But he didn't, cried Pollyanna. Not till I talked to him first, and he didn't even know who I was till I took the calffoot's jelly and had to make him understand that Aunt Polly didn't send him it. Nancy sprang to her feet and clasped her hands together suddenly. Oh, Miss Pollyanna, I know, she cried. The next minute she was down at Pollyanna's side again. Tell me, now think, and answer straight and true, she urged excitedly. It was after he found out you was Miss Polly's niece that he said he didn't ever want to see you again, wasn't it? Yes. I thought as much, said Nancy. And Miss Polly wouldn't send jelly herself, would she? No. And you told him she didn't send it? Why, yes. And he began to act strange after he found out you was her niece, didn't he? Why, yes. And he did act a little strange over that jelly, admitted Pollyanna with a frown. Nancy drew a long sigh. Then I've got it. Mr. John Pendleton was Miss Polly Harrington's sweetheart, she announced impressively, but with a glance over her shoulder. Why, Nancy, he couldn't be. She doesn't like him, objected Pollyanna. Nancy gave her a scornful glance. Of course she don't. That's the quarrel. Pollyanna still looked incredulous. With another long breath, Nancy happily settled herself to tell the story. It's like this. Just before you come, Mr. Tom told me Miss Polly had had a sweetheart once. I didn't believe it, but Mr. Tom said she had, and that he was living now right in this town. And now I know, of course, it's John Pendleton. Don't he have a mystery? Don't he shut himself up in that house all alone? Didn't he act strange when he found out you was Miss Polly's niece? And now didn't he say you reminded him of something he wants to forget? Just as if anyone couldn't see it was Miss Polly. Why, Miss Pollyanna, it's as plain as the nose on your face. Oh, said Pollyanna, amazed. But Nancy, if they loved each other, they'd make up sometime. Both of 'em, all alone all these years. I should think they'd be glad to make up. Nancy sniffed. Well, I guess maybe you don't know much about love affairs, Miss Pollyanna. Chapter 17. Prisms. As the warm August days passed, Pollyanna went often to the house of Pendleton Hill. She did not feel, however, that her visits were really a success. The man seemed to want her there, but when she was there, he seemed scarcely any happier. At least, so Pollyanna thought. He talked to her, and he showed her many strange and beautiful things, books, pictures, and curios. But he still fretted over his helplessness, and he disliked the rules of the unwelcomed members of his household. He seemed to like to hear Pollyanna talk, however, and Pollyanna talked. But she was never sure when she would look up and find him lying back on his pillow with that hurt look. She twice tried to tell him about the glad game, but neither time had she got beyond the beginning of what her father had said. John Pendleton had turned the conversation abruptly to another subject. Pollyanna never doubted that John Pendleton was her Aunt Polly's one-time sweetheart, and with all the strength of her loving, loyal heart, she wished she could bring happiness into their, to her mind, miserable, lonely lives. Just how to do this, however, she could not see. She talked to Mr. Pendleton about her aunt. He listened sometimes politely, sometimes irritably, frequently with a smile. She tried to talk to her aunt about Mr. Pendleton. Generally, however, Miss Polly would not listen. She always found something else to talk about. She often did that, however, when Pollyanna was talking of others. Of Dr. Chilton, for instance. Pollyanna blamed this, though, on the fact that Dr. Chilton had seen her with the rose in her hair. Aunt Polly, indeed, seemed particularly bitter against Dr. Chilton, as Pollyanna found out one day when a bad cold had shut her up in the house. "If you are not better by night, I shall send for the doctor," Aunt Polly said. "Shall you? Then I'm going to be worse," gurgled Pollyanna. "I'd love to have Dr. Chilton come to see me." "Dr. Chilton is not our family physician," Miss Polly said sternly. "I shall send for Dr. Warren, if you are worse." Pollyanna did not grow worse, however, and Dr. Warren was not summoned. "And I'm glad so, too," Pollyanna said to her aunt that evening. "Of course, I like Dr. Warren, but I like Dr. Chilton better, and I'm afraid he'd feel hurt if I didn't have him. He wasn't really to blame that he happened to see you when I dressed you up so pretty that day, Aunt Polly," she finished. "Pollyanna, I really do not wish to discuss Dr. Chilton or his feelings," said Miss Polly. Pollyanna looked at her for a moment, and then she sighed. "I just love to see you when your cheeks are pink like that. Why, Aunt Polly!" But her aunt was already out of sight down the hall. Toward the end of August, Pollyanna, making an early morning call on John Pendleton, found a flaming band of blue and gold and green edged with red and violet lying across his pillow. She stopped short in delight. "Why, Mr. Pendleton, it's a baby rainbow, come to pay you a visit," she exclaimed, clapping her hands together softly. "Oh, how pretty it is! But how did it get in?" she cried. The man laughed a little grimly. "Well, I suppose it got in when the sun struck that glass thermometer in the window," he said wearily. "Oh, it's so pretty. Does just the sun do that? My, it's like living in a rainbow." The man laughed, watching Pollyanna's face curiously. Suddenly, a new thought came to him, and he touched the bell at his side. "Nora," he said, when the elderly maid appeared at the door, "bring me one of those big candlesticks from the mantel in the front drawing-room." "Yes, sir," murmured the woman, and in a minute she returned. A musical tinkling entered the room with her, and it came from the prisms encircling the old-fashioned candlestick in her hand. "Thank you. You may set it here on the stand," directed the man. "Now get a string and fasten it to that window there. Let the string reach straight across the window. That will be all. Thank you," he said when she had carried out his directions. As she left the room, he turned smiling toward Pollyanna. "Bring me that candlestick, please, Pollyanna." With both hands she brought it, and in a moment he was slipping off the prisms one by one until a dozen of them lay on the bed. "Now, my dear, suppose you take them and hook them to that string across the window. If you really want to live in a rainbow, we'll have to have a rainbow for you to live in." Pollyanna had hung up 3 of the prisms in the sunlight window when she saw what was going to happen. She was so excited then she could scarcely control her shaking fingers enough to hang up the rest. But at last her task was finished, and she stepped back with a cry of delight. The bedroom had become a fairyland. Everywhere were bits of dancing red and green, violet and orange, gold and blue. The wall, the floor, and the furniture, even the bed itself, shimmered with color. "How lovely!" breathed Pollyanna. "I reckon the sun himself is trying to play the game now. Don't you?" she cried, forgetting that Mr. Pendleton could not know what she was talking about. "Oh, how I wish I had a lot of those things. I would like to give them to Aunt Polly and Miss Snow and lots of folks. Then they'd be glad all right. Why, I think even Aunt Polly'd get so glad she couldn't help banging doors if she lived in a rainbow. Don't you?" Mr. Pendleton laughed. "Well, I think it would take more than a few prisms in the sunlight to make your aunt bang many doors for gladness. But what do you mean?" Pollyanna stared, and then she drew a long breath. "Oh, I forgot. You don't know about the game." "Well, suppose you tell me." And Pollyanna told him the whole thing, starting with the crutches that should have been a doll. As she talked, she looked at the dancing colors from the prism swaying in the sunlit window. "That's all," she sighed when she was finished. "Now you know why I said the sun was trying to play the game." For a moment there was silence, and then a low voice from the bed said unsteadily, "Perhaps, but I'm thinking that you are the very finest prism of them all, Pollyanna." "Oh, but I don't know how beautiful colors, or I don't show beautiful colors when the sun shines through me, Mr. Pendleton." "Don't you?" smiled the man, and Pollyanna wondered why there were tears in his eyes. "No," she said, adding, "I'm afraid the sun doesn't make anything but freckles out of me." And the man laughed with a laugh that sounded almost like a sob.